Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee and joining me as always is Milly.
Hi.
And we have Rhianna.
Hi.
And we have Smash.
Hello.
And joining us today as our special guest, we have a jack of all trades as a writer, producer and an actor, and probably some more that we're going to uncover in the episode. We have Mitch Watson.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We're just so excited to get kind of talking about your career in general and then focusing in on some of the other shows and movies that you've been involved in. But going right back to the start, I can see that your kind of introduction to the film industry was with the movie Primal Rage. Was this with the with the hope of oh my gosh. Well, was that with the hope of becoming a writer and producer one day, or was acting more what you were going into it with?
I did that movie, if you really want to go into it. I did that movie when I was in college. I think I was a freshman, maybe a freshman or a sophomore. But at that time, this is going to sound, I mean, I began my career as a magician, which I'm sure isn't in any of your research because I don't think it's anywhere. But I started performing as a magician when I was 12. And then sort of did that forever, worked out. There's a place out here in Los Angeles called the Magic Castle, which is a relatively well-known place for magicians and stuff. And they had a junior membership of which I was involved in. Anyways, I did that for a very, very long time. And then that kind of segued into acting. And so when I started acting 15, 16 years old. And then when I was about 18 is when Primal Rage happened. And it was good because it helped pay for college because I didn't have enough money. So that was a complete, here's a little interesting tidbit about Primal Rage. The other lead actor in it, besides me, apparently you can find the movie now. For a long time, you couldn't find it anywhere. I think it's now, you can get it on YouTube. But if you see the movie, the guy who plays the lead, whose name is Patrick Lowe, the original lead of Primal Rage, who I was supposed to play opposite of, was Brad Pitt, originally. When a very unknown Brad Pitt. And I met him at the audition, super nice guy. Obviously he was unknown, nobody knew who he was. And he got the part and turned it down because they wouldn't let him fly back for pilot season, is what they said, what I was told. And I remember the casting agent at the time going, he blew it. That guy blew it. This was going to be a big deal for him. And so, well, whatever, I think like three years later, he did Thelma and Louise. So he didn't blow it. But anyway, so he was originally supposed to be in it, but it was a very strange production. It was shot in Miami. It was mainly done by, if you're fans of horror, it was done by a lot of the guys who were the Italian horror movie guys. Like, Carlo Rambaldi, who did E.T. and his son directed it. His other son did all the makeup effects along with Carlo Rambaldi. I found out later the guy who wrote it was a fairly well-known, like, Italian horror movie writer who was writing under a pseudonym. And it was financed by a guy, another one of those guys who, he did the Giallo films and stuff like that. So if I had known that, I probably would have been a lot more impressed, but I didn't know any of that at the time. Because they wouldn't really tell us. So so we shot it down in Miami. I got to work with a real baboon. And you guys have not seen it, right?
I haven't watched that. I found the trailer on IMDb. I think about the trailer on IMDb.
It's terrible. It's a terrible movie. Terrible. It's basically, the premise is that this scientist is experimenting on monkeys, particularly baboons. I don't think they ever say what he's trying to do to them or whatnot. But anyways, it drives them crazy. And one of them bites me. And then it transfers its crazy to me. And then I go on a killing spree briefly before my best friend, who was going to be played by Brad Pitt, but then was played by Patrick Lowe, kills me. But then by that point, my girlfriend in the film has been infected and she goes on a killing spree. Here's another little interesting tidbit. The guy who played the chief villain on it, a guy named Doug Sloan, So Doug and I got to be friends for a while after the movie was done, because he lived in Los Angeles as well. And then we lost touch with each other. Flash forward 15 years or something like that. And I'm at DreamWorks in the bathroom, at the urinal, going to the bathroom. And I look over and I see this tall guy, because Doug's pretty tall. I look over and I go, Doug? And he goes, Mitch? And it turned out that Doug had also been working in animation for the last several years. He had started on Power Rangers. He was one of the guys, the main writers of Power Rangers, and then gone on. He was doing, at that point, he was doing How to Train Your Dragon for DreamWorks. And it was like, that's too strange that we ran into each other. So anyways, we reconnected and we're still friends. And that was kind of nice. So, but anyways, but the movie, beyond that, you know, the movie is what it is. But it's terrible, laughably bad. I remember when we saw it originally in LA, many years after it was made, people just howled with laughter, and the director tried to claim that it had been meant to be a comedy, but we knew it wasn't meant to be a comedy. It was just terrible. Just a terrible movie. Anyway. Don't watch it.
Like 28 days later, almost, with all the kind of monkey experimentation. Kind of interesting there.
I don't know. And it was also too, for a movie that had effects by Carlo Rambaldi and his son, you would have expected the monkey to be a lot better. But the puppet, they had a monkey puppet, and there was a real monkey and then a monkey puppet that bit me, and then ultimately gets hit by a car. It's a terrible puppet. I mean, it looks awful. It's like I could have made that puppet out of like a sock and some googly eye. It was just it was really surprisingly bad. Anyways, there you go. Last tidbit, and then we can really get off of Primal Rage. The actor who played the scientist was a guy named Bo Svensson, who, if you're a movie buff, was in Walking Tall and had a career, I think, in the 70s briefly. And he dies at the end of it by falling on a sprinkler head that pierces his face, and then the water just starts shooting out of his mouth like a sprinkler. It was kind of a cool idea. But anyways, they built a prosthetic tongue for him with a tube through it and everything like that. And myself and Rambaldi's son, again, remember, I was 18 at the time. You know, we both used to smoke pot out of that tongue all the time on set. Or after, I should say, because he really thought that was the coolest thing to be smoking out of his tongue. There you go.
It certainly sounds like you managed to take a lot of good memories and stories away from the movie. And like you're saying,
you know, everything you do, I've been fortunate in some ways that everything I've done is, there's always something fun to take away from it. I mean, I was 18 years old or something, making a horror movie in Miami. I'd never been to Miami. I'd never flown first class, because they had to fly you when you're, as a SAG actor, you have to be flying first class. They couldn't get around that. Never had per diem, never done any of it. I'd been on sets before, but never like that. It was, so you're Kid in a Candy Store. And I didn't know we were making a shitty movie. I thought we were making something good. It turned out to be terrible, But you don't know that really when you're doing it. You kind of did. You kind of could tell that this one might be kind of crappy, but we didn't really know. So we just had fun. It was a good time.
Like you were saying, you were quite young when you did that movie. So was there ever anyone, actors or anything that made you want to get into that profession growing up? Anyone that you kind of looked at?
I kind of was doomed to get into it, because my dad was a cameraman at a studio here in town. Well, it's local channel 5, but really he worked where my dad worked is now Netflix. It's Netflix bought the lot that used to be what they called Channel 5 or KTLA back then. And it's a series of sound stages. I think there's 6 or 7 of them, and Netflix eventually bought them all. But at that time, they were sort of rented out for different productions. So I grew up going to the set of HR Puffin stuff, what else? Dr. Shrinker, Land of the Lost, all of these shows that they used to shoot there, and my dad worked on them. Old 80s shows like Solid Gold and the Donnie and Marie show and all of these other shows. So I grew up going to that stuff, so I was around it all the time. And my dad was a former musician, so he had a lot of friends who were in the industry. So it's basically everybody in my family, in one way or another, was touched by the industry. My grandmother was mistress to a very old time silent film star. Another long story. But anyway, so they were going into the industry was not even really a question. It's like some people who grew up with parents who were doctors and lawyers or whatnot. Everybody in my family, my uncle did movie posters, drew movie posters for a living, movie poster artist. So everybody in one way or another was involved in it. And so they were very positive in terms of me going into that business. It wasn't, they like, look, it's hard and, we don't know how it's going to go, but it was like, what else are we going to say? We're all in it. None of them had gone to college. So that was sort of how I was introduced to it. I mean, everybody I knew was an actor or a writer or a producer in some way, one way or another. So it was just the natural, there was never really any question. I was never going to do anything else. And it wasn't until college that I started writing and found that I liked writing a lot better. I loved acting, but I hated auditioning. And I hated it. I also too, as I'm sure you've well heard, when you look a particular way, I wear glasses. I don't have them on right now, but you're immediately, oh, he's the dorky computer guy. That's what he's going to play. And I wasn't that guy, but that was the only parts I could get. Another little interesting tidbit for it. So when I went to school at UCLA, one of my friends there who was going the same was Jack Black. And so, because Jack and I are around the same age. And so Jack and I used to audition against each other all the time for roles, and he always got them. So when you find yourself like up for something and you're auditioning against Jack Black, it's like, I'm just going to try something different right now. I'm just going to, because he was always super talented. But anyway, so that's how that happened. But because of him and some other people, I ended up becoming part of a theater company, which was the next sort of phase, which was after college. I ended up joining a theater company out here called the Actors Gang, which was started by Tim Robbins and a bunch of other people from UCLA. So, and Jack had introduced me to it. And so I went there and I stayed there as part of that company for about 6 years. And that's where I really started writing. I started writing plays for them because they were basically a group of actors, really, really talented, but nobody knew how to write. So they needed somebody to write for them. So that became me and there was another woman in the group as well who wrote. So I did that for many, many years, for about 6 years, 7 years. And during that, while I was still writing there, I also was I was a waiter for a long time, and then got a job as a production assistant at an animation studio called Klasky Csupo. Now, Klasky Csupo doesn't really exist anymore, but at the time, they were one of the bigger independent animation studios because they had created a show called Rugrats. So they created Rugrats. And then I was hired to work on a show called Duckman, which was one of the very early adult animated shows that was on the USA Network at that time. And in fact, the creator, Everett Peck, this is Duckman, by the way. I have a cell that I still need to put up. Duckman, right there.
Oh, wow.
And the creator, actually Everett Peck, the creator, just passed away this last couple of weeks. So I was sort of writing at night and working in production during the day to pay the bills. And little by little, what happened was I got promoted. I eventually became the producer of Duckman. And I got to know a lot of the other people in that industry who were writing. And I had at the same time been writing screenplays, mainly horror screenplays, which is really what I love, and submitting them and getting close, but nothing happening. And it was just one rejection after another. It was really, really tough. And it was kind of like, what's going on? And then through animation, I was finally able to meet some other writers and kind of work in the back door. And two things happened. One was I got to know the guys who were writing on a show called All Real Monsters at the time. And I kept submitting premises to them for the show. And eventually, either they just got sick of me or they finally liked something, but they finally bought an idea. And at the exact same time that happened, I was doing a play, one of the plays that I had written, and some guys from Warner Brothers came to see it who I had known from the improv comedy world. And they happened to be doing a show called Freakazoid at that time. And they said, would you be interested in writing for Freakazoid? It literally happened at the exact same time. So I said, yeah, I mean, nobody's paying me. So that became that was my first job, was writing on Freakazoid. And then through those guys, I got to write on Pinky and the Brain, and then a couple of other things. And then eventually started getting more and more freelance, because back then when I started in animation, they didn't really have writers' rooms for animation. It was all pretty much freelance. There was one person in charge. He would find the other writers. You'd sort of come in for a session, you'd kick around ideas, and then you'd go off and write your thing. Now we actually have, for the most part, rooms of writers, small rooms. They're trying to get rid of that again, but we'll see if that happens or not. So anyways, eventually ended up quitting. So at Class V Chupo led to me working at DreamWorks when DreamWorks first opened, when they were doing Prince of Egypt. And I ended up producing a thing for them called Joseph and the Amazing, it was starring a then relatively unknown Ben Affleck, which was a very interesting story. Anyway, so I did that for DreamWorks, and at the same time, I got to, same thing, I met the guys who were working down the hall writing a show called Toonsylvania at the time, and I became friends with them. And I said, well, if you ever need anybody, let me know. So then they started giving me some jobs. So I started writing over there, but still producing, and then eventually just got to be, and then when DreamWorks TV animation, there were two incarnations. I don't even remember what year this is, but it's around when Prince of Egypt and the pirate movie that they did came out, El Dorado, came out. The Jeffrey Katzenberg dissolved their entire TV animation department, just dissolved it. And I ended up leaving with one of the women who was running it to go start a new production company, animation company, at a place called Carsey Warner, who was at that time famous for doing That 70s Show, Third Rock from the Sun, and all these, and they wanted to get an animation. And they had a show called God, the Devil, and Bob. So for NBC. And I think it was NBC. Anyway, so this was an adult show. It was going to be on at 8 and then 8 p.m. Got a great time slot, bunch of good people working on it. It was a complete disaster. Because as you will find, as if you work in animation long enough, whenever live action people, especially sitcom people, come in and work on it, it takes them a while to realize that you can't continually rewrite something in animation, that eventually you have to stop or the show's never going to make it to air. And that was a hard lesson for everyone to learn. We were also dealing with a show that had the word God in the title, and God had been designed to look like Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead, who apparently looked like the creator of the show, his dad. So we got death threats, all kinds of them. People were really, really angry about the show before even seeing it. And then it was, of course, because they wouldn't stop tinkering into it, I think it was about 3 months late making the air. So the network was pissed. So eventually it got canned. And at that point I went, you know what? I don't want to work in production anymore. I'm just going to write. So I quit taking jobs producing animation as a physical producer, as opposed to a creative producer, and just started doing freelance. And then lo and behold, about a year went by. I got hired to work on a show called Mucha Lucha at Warner Brothers, by a man named Peter Hastings, who was one of the creators of Pinky and the Brain. And so Peter and I became friends, and we did that show, and then that show ended. And then Peter went to Nickelodeon to work on a show called Cat Scratch, and which I submitted premises for, and they bought a couple of those. So then they brought me on to Cat Scratch. I ended up working on Cat Scratch and becoming like the head writer on Cat Scratch. So that took me up another notch. And then when that show got canceled was when Tack and the Power of Juju, which was a video game that Nickelodeon owned, and they'd been trying to turn into a TV show forever. And it had 6 showrunners at that point, and things just kept going wrong. And then a friend of mine, Jed Spingarn, took over, and Jed had been doing. He later would create the Thundermans, which was a live action show on Nickelodeon. At that time, he'd only done animation, so he brought me over, and I was happy that I worked with Jed. And then I think the second day, Jed was taken off the show and put on Back to the Barnyard. So then we had nobody running it, and then they brought in another guy who had worked on the video game, and he lasted about 2 months before he was fired. So again, we had nothing, but we had an air date, and we were already 2 months behind, and production was rolling, so we had to keep going. So then they looked at me and they said, well, you're sort of the last guy standing, so we're just going to put you in charge of the show. So that's how I ended up becoming a showrunner for animation. TAC was it was a very, very, very difficult show. It was the first in-house CG show that Nickelodeon ever did. They were building the sort of CG department while we did the show, and it was a freaking nightmare. It was a nightmare. We couldn't do anything. CG was sort of really rough back then for television. It was too expensive to do it on a level that, say, Pixar was doing. So we had these crazy ass parameters, like you could only do 2 backgrounds per episode. And when we say background, we mean the front of a building and the side. If you want to do the interior, that's another background, and you can't do that. We're like, okay, I don't know how we're going to make this show. But so we did. We made the show. It didn't perform the way Nickelodeon really wanted it to perform, and I pretty much got fired. I wasn't officially fired, but they let me finish the writing and then let me go. So I wasn't around for post. So now I went off, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I went back and did another play with the Actors Gang, which I had written. And what ended up happening was I got hired. And so this is the stuff that sort of all changed for me, was when I got hired to write the movie for Ben 10, the live action movie, the first one. And while hanging out on set, I got to meet a guy named Sam Register, who was one of the EPs. And Sam had been instrumental in sort of creating the Ben 10 IP. And Sam and I became friends. And when that ended, Sam and I sort of partnered up and started trying to pitch our own things and sell our own things. And in the midst of that, Sam was tagged to be the head of Warner Brothers Animation, the TV side, up to which he is still the head. And so that was how I came to work on Scooby-Doo, because I was doing the play, and Sam came and saw the play, and he knew my sort of oddball sense of humor. And then we had clicked while working on the Ben 10 movie. And so he said, listen, we're trying, at that point, Warner Brothers Animation was sort of dead. It was dead. There was nothing going on. All the shows have been canceled. I mean, everything, it was really bad at that point. And Sam said, I want to revitalize it. And I want to get some of the main IP that we've done in the past. Scooby-Doo is one of them. Would you be interested in rebooting it for us? And I said, no, I'm not really interested, because I said, look, they did it great the first time. Wasn't crazy about a lot of the other reboots. I said, I don't know what I would bring to it that would be any better than what they did originally, which is what everybody loves anyways. And he said, well, if you could do anything you wanted to do, what would you do? And I said, I don't know, but I can tell you what I would try to do was be what they did with Battlestar Galactica. Because Battlestar Galactica was on the air at that time, and I just thought it was brilliant and a great reboot from the original cheeseball version that had been in, I think, the 80s. And I said, if you would let me do that with it, just really turn it on its head, I'd be interested. And he said, why don't you meet with Tony Cervoni and Spike Brandt, who were sort of the creative art side of the show, and see if you guys can come up with something. So we sat down for months and started coming to, and what we actually did was we went into the archives and we found all the original source material that they had used, much of which they discarded. The fact that all the kids were supposed to come and live in this sort of town, kind of like La Jolla, which is a beach community here in Los Angeles. And so we said, well, that's what we should do that instead of having them drive all over the place. So then that was where we came up with the idea of Crystal Cove. And Tony had visited this weird town somewhere where it was supposedly haunted. Like there was all this haunted shit there. And so that was where we came up with the idea, what if we created this town where it was haunted, the whole town, and it was all full of all the ghosts that we know from the original version of the series. And I said, and the entire economy of the town is based on these ghosts and people coming to see these ghosts. And the only thing it all up is the fact that there's these 4 kids and their dog who keep disproving everything. And so the town hates them. They hate them. And that's why in the pilot, if you see the pilot, they've been arrested and everything, and they're always getting in trouble, and the sheriff hates them and stuff. And that was all that. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing was, and we should make it so that none of the parents can be trusted. None of them. They're all of them. And that was sort of where it started. And then we said, but if we want to, I don't know why, I remember who had the idea, but we had this sort of obsession, because at the time in animation, you couldn't do anything that was serialized. Everything had to be a standalone episode. Nobody would do serialized stuff. And I said, we should do that. We should do a serialized storyline that just goes, because we knew at that point that we were going to get 52 episodes. We already knew that. And so I said, so we know we're not going to get canceled. We know we're going to make it all the way to 52. Why don't we do that? Part of the reason, by the way, that this succeeded was we weren't making it for American television. We were making it for British television. We originally made Mystery Incorporated for the British version of Cartoon Network. Our executives we had a British executive. We only dealt with British standards and practices people. That was it. We barely dealt with United States except for Sam and some of the heads of Warner Brothers. But mainly we dealt with London and this man in London, and very different sensibility over there with you guys. I mean, they were more than willing to allow us to do what we wanted to do. They were totally into it. The only thing that freaked them out was that we wanted to have a relationship between Shaggy and Velma. That was it. That was the one. That was the thing that freaked them out more than anything. It was like, oh, we can't. Oh my God. And it's so weird. Why would you do that? And we kept saying, there's a reason we're doing it. We have an idea for Velma, and we want to start it in the first season and pay it off in the second season. We couldn't tell them that what we were going to do was we wanted to show the sort of arc of this female character, because we knew about the tropes and we knew what they were saying on the internet all the time. And we were like, you know what? We should freaking lean into that, and we should do that. So Tony and I made a decision before we even wrote the pilot that, okay, so Velma is gay, and we're going to show her, though, as a character that doesn't know that in the beginning, or has feelings but doesn't understand them, which is why she kind of acts the way she does in the beginning of the series, and why by the end of the series you have to be kind of blind not to notice that she's gay. So, but we were not allowed to say that. That was a pretty much a line in the sand with the studios. At that time, you could not do, especially in Scooby-Doo, you could not. They wouldn't show a gay character. They just wouldn't. There were a bunch of things like that. It was like that. There was also after Scooby, I worked on a version of Batman where I wanted to do the character of Oracle from the comic books in a wheelchair. And that also got killed because they said they didn't want to show characters in wheelchairs. They said it's depressing. Flash forward now, and we're doing the show that I'm doing now, Big Nate. We were encouraged to put in a handicapped character. So, I mean, things have changed for the better in that sense, as well as, being able to show gay characters now. But at that time, you couldn't. So we had to sort of hide it. So we took a lot of flack from the audience about Velma's character because they were like, no, she's so bitchy towards Shaggy. And, we've got a lot of hate basically. And Tony and I just sort of had to bite our tongues. And so if you read any interviews from us in that time, I think in a couple, we were like, just wait and see, we're doing something, we have a plan, but most people just want to get angry about it. So anyways, but if you go back and watch it, you'll see that she doesn't know how to act with Shaggy. she doesn't know, she's not getting from Shaggy what she wants to get, and she herself doesn't understand it. And Shaggy's a little bit too insecure and naive to understand it too. He'd just rather be with his dog. Later on in that, I think it's in the first season, Velma finds a mermaid at one point, and this female mermaid that she forms this bond with. And we thought that would explain to the audience, like, look what we're doing here. This is not it's not haphazard that she's falling in love with a female mermaid. There's a reason. Nobody got it. Maybe in hindsight they got it, but they didn't at the time. Anyway, so we had to pitch. We came up with these ideas, and we always had this idea that that Fred wasn't going to be like there was something up with Fred's dad. And I don't remember if we figured it out or not before we pitched it or not, but I remember very distinctly the head of Warner Brothers, Peter Roth, had to get his approval. Now, the weird thing was that Peter Roth started his career as an executive producer on the original Scooby back in like 1968, 69. Now he was the head of all television. And so we had to pitch him and get his approval. And so we pitched him. Oh, and the other thing that I'm leaving out is the fact that they wanted it to be scary. They wanted it to be really scary, and which was great with me. And little side note, which people don't know, is there was the episode with the little kids where all the little kids get spookified. It's in one of the first batch. That episode actually was kicked back to us by Cartoon Network because they said it was too scary originally when we did it. So we had to recut it and redo the music for it too, so it wasn't quite as intense, because they said it was freaking kids out. So we were very proud of that, quite honestly, that we were able to actually scare kids with a Scooby-Doo show. But anyways, we pitched it to Peter Roth. He loved it, and his one suggestion was, you know what you should do? At the very end of season 1, we should find out that Fred's dad is not actually his dad. He goes, because that freaks kids out when they think that their parents aren't who their parents are supposed to be. We were like, we can do that? And he's like, oh yeah, and he said we could do it. So great. So that's how that bit of business ended up happening. And that really sort of blew the whole thing open. And the idea that, it fed into the idea that Tony and I had about that there had been a previous Mystery Incorporated and the whole thing with the planispheric disc and all that stuff. So, anyway, so that sort of in a nutshell is how a lot of it ended up happening. Now, part of the reason that the show was able to do some of the things that it was able to do is when about halfway through the first season, our executive in England was fired or left. I'm never quite sure. Nobody told me the actual story. And we suddenly didn't really have an executive working on the show. And so we were able to pretty much do whatever we wanted to do, which is why some of the earlier episodes are a little bit wackier than they became later. The culmination being the Mystery Solver State Finals, the one where all the sidekicks end up having to be the ones to solve it, which was an episode that I wrote and that we had planned on doing and stuff. And it was right after that episode that we got a new executive who came in. And I think one of the first things he said was, how come there's no Scooby Snacks? What? Where are the Scooby Snacks? Nobody's eating Scooby Snacks. And that was purposely, we said, I didn't want to do Scooby Snacks. I said, it's not that I hate them, but I think they're kind of done and silly. I said, I don't want the characters falling in pickle barrels and crabs biting them on the butt and stuff like that. I want to kind of, for this version of the show, we wanted to kind of get away from that. And by that point, we were so far into it that they really couldn't stop us. But if you watch the first season compared to the second season, you will notice that Scooby Snacks start to make an appearance in the second season much more. And that was because we were told we had to do that. But anyways, so that's how Scooby ended up happening. And we were given a lot of free reign on that show. I have pictures somewhere, I don't know where they are, but we had a board, and because we mapped out we had mapped out the 52 episodes before we even began production. So we knew what was going to happen in episode 1, and we knew how it was all going to end. And, we didn't have every little detail worked out, but we knew what was going to happen. We knew about the planispheric disc. We knew about the Nibiru, which was also, I should mention too, there was a guy named Mike Ryan who came on in the second season, who was also very instrumental in the creation of that, because Mike was obsessed with Nibiru and all that stuff. So that became, we would have these long writing sessions, just me and Tony and Mike, in Mike's, I think it was in Mike's office, where we just drink, we just get drunk and then come up with ideas, crazy ideas, and then put them on a board. And then we'd have to pitch them to the network, but I think they only half understood them. And, so that, again, that was why we got away with a lot. But, because when you're looking at a board with 100 note cards on it, mapping out these stories, they get kind of overwhelmed. Executives, they sort of go, okay, yeah, all right. And then they sort of kind of leave you alone. But what else can I tell you? But anyways, that's how I came to do. I mean, some of the fun, we got to do a lot of great things. The only regret from that working on Scooby was we had an episode that was going to feature Tenacious D, if you know who Tenacious D is.
Yes.
So the episode was written. They were going to do a song. It was the episode that ended up actually featuring the English Beat, Dave Wakeling from the English Beat. That was who we were able to get instead. So we got, Jack and Kyle had agreed to do it. My friend Bob White, who was also very good friends with them, wrote the script. We had the song. Everything was ready to go. And then I still don't know the full story, but something happened with the legalities of, the lawyers got into it with each other. And the next thing we knew, it just all blew up and we had to rejigger the whole thing. And then it became that we were able to get Dave Wakeling, and Dave Wakeling came in and wrote a song for the show, and it was great. But it always bums me out because the premise of that particular episode, in that the conceit was that Kyle was actually the star and that nobody knew who Jack was. And Jack was sort of walking around in his shadow and everything. Kyle, of course, loved this idea. But anyways, it would have been great. Didn't happen, but maybe somewhere down the line. Because they talk about, they keep talking about bringing it back, because I mean, to be perfectly honest, another aspect of the show, which some people know and some people don't, is the Cartoon Network hated it. They hated Mystery Incorporated, hated it with a passion. And really what happened was they kept pulling it off the schedule over and over and over again, 12 times total, it's what I've been told. And the first time it was pulled, I was told it was because, and again, this is all, I'm hearing all this secondhand, but that we came out right around the same time that Adventure Time came out. And Adventure Time was Cartoon Network's show, and Scooby wasn't, and we were doing better. So they pulled us for Adventure Time. And then they would stick us on at these weird times, but they'd take us off the schedule and not tell anybody. So nobody really got it. They would show stuff out of continuity. They even cut ads where they revealed who the villain was at the end. So we were convinced they were trying to sabotage us. I don't know if they were or not, but that's how it always felt. Anyways, 52 episodes go. We finished them. Cartoon Network couldn't have gotten rid of us faster. They just hated it. They hated us. Warner Brothers, Sam and those, they were great. Cartoon Network didn't want anything to do with us. Okay, fine. We all move on. I go boot Batman. Other people move on to something else. Suddenly along comes this new streaming site called Netflix, and Netflix buys all of these animated shows from Warner Brothers, including Mystery Incorporated. Mystery Incorporated goes on Netflix and becomes a huge hit for them all over the world. And so suddenly people, I was told, were called into meetings going, why is it that this show is successful in every other part of the world except for the United States? And that was where they found out that it had been pulled off the schedule 12 times. And Cartoon Network really didn't have anything to say about it. But in the interim, it became very, very popular on Netflix. And suddenly, I think this was almost 5 years later after the show ended, suddenly it was a hit. And the funny thing was when Tony and I were making it, we used to say that, well, we don't know if anybody's ever going to watch the show or like it or get behind it, but we do know, or we felt we knew, someday people would find it. That was what we always believed. Someday, and it happened faster than we thought it was going to happen. So, and to this day, it's still weirdly popular. I mean, to this day, of the things I've worked on, that is one of the main ones that people recognize, especially Mystery Incorporated. I have 2 kids now, 2 daughters. And I mean, when I meet their parents, I'm told, oh my God, we watch it all the time, blah, blah, blah. Other writers, that I've met through people are like, oh my God, I've watched it with my kids. It's insane. How did you, blah, 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 blah. They love it. So that's rewarding. It's very nice. It's nice when you work on something that you really, because we killed ourselves making that show. That decade, like now we're going on almost 2 decades late. I think it's 15 years or something like that. So that it still shows up almost every other month on somebody's list of this is their favorite version of Scooby-Doo is super rewarding. I don't think like I said, I've worked on a bunch of other things since then, and it's still the one that most people know. It's especially you go Scooby-Doo, and then you go Mystery Incorporated, oh yeah, that version. Yeah, we like that version. So because if you notice, after our version, they got much sillier again because Cartoon Network didn't want to do another Mystery Incorporated. They hated it. They also hated Batman, my version of Batman, which we did right afterwards. They hated it because it was too dark. It was the same thing they hated about Scooby. They just said it's too dark. It's not for kids. I disagree, but whatever. Anyways, I've been rambling now continually. You guys have anything you'd like to say? I've just been talking.
I think we completely agree with you on so many things, and I think just seeing an angle to Scooby where there was that story progressing throughout the series and everything, it was just something that so many people have wanted to see for so long. So can I ask, before this series, were you familiar with Scooby? Was it something you watched growing up, or was this kind of almost a push into what Scooby-Doo is when you started work on the project?
No, it was, I mean, I probably had watched it as a kid briefly, but no, I was certainly not a diehard Scooby fan. And I've met many since then. Like there was a woman who, when my first daughter was born, helped us for about for a couple of months. And she was a diehard Scooby-Doo fan. And she was very excited when she'd heard that I worked on it. And then she watched Mystery Incorporated and hated it. Because she said, it's not my Scooby. It's just not my Scooby. Because the people who are really, really into the original version are very, protective of their version of Scooby-Doo. So I was not one of those people. And no, it wasn't until I started working on it and we did a really deep dive into the archives of all the original source material, all the original designs. There's I think in the second season, there's an episode where Scooby, they meet these 2 kids who live in a whale, and they have a dolphin partner named Scooby. That all came from our research because we found out that there had been a show that had come out the year before Scooby-Doo had come out, I think in 1967 or like in 67, where they had a character named Scooby, and the show had failed. I think it was called Moby Dick. The show had failed, but they liked the name, so they just gave it to this other character. And that was a lot of the way those things were. And that was the whole thing behind the Mystery Solvers, episode. Because if you look at what they did, they just sort of cannibalized. Scooby-Doo was a success, so they just came up with 5 other versions of it, And we thought that was really funny. And so we would go into the archives and find all this stuff. But that was really neat. I mean, that's one of the nice things about working on a show like that for a company like Warner Brothers that keeps all that stuff, is that you can, it's like going down a rabbit hole and you just like, oh my God, look at all this stuff. It's amazing. So that's sort of where I really kind of fell in love with it. And then getting to work with the actors as well, like Frank Welker, who, had been doing it since the beginning. And we were really afraid that Frank was going to hate what we were doing. And we knew that if Frank didn't like our take on it, that the show was kind of dead, because he's sort of the god of Scooby-Doo. And we were doing something different with Fred. And so when we did the very first record, Frank changed what he was doing as Fred to match the script. And we said, don't do that. You don't have to do that, Frank. So we want you to do exactly what you always did. We just want you to do it through this lens of this character who's essentially on the spectrum. Again, never said in the show, but that was sort of our backstory for Fred, was that He's a bit on the spectrum, which is why he has an obsession with traps and control and keeping things contained because of what happened with his mom and that kind of stuff. That was all backstory. But once we told that to Frank, he was all in, and he loved it because he finally got something to do. He wasn't just sort of the stud who says a couple of words and then sets a trap or something. He actually had shit to do, and he loved it. And he and I, we become friends since then. But it was great getting to work with somebody like that, and some of the other people on the show, Matt Lillard and Gray DeLisle. You know, they're just we did it for so long. I mean, I think we recorded shows for 3 or 4 years, something like that. So, you know, that all of that made me a huge fan of the property. But no, to answer my long-winded answer to your question, no, I did not. I didn't have much more of a knowledge of Scooby-Doo than most people do when I first came into it. Now I do, but then I didn't. It was all research.
So then upon writing for this show and everything, did you eventually find a favorite member of Mystery Inc?
Oh, Fred. He was always my favorite member. Always. We had the most fun with Fred. He was, hands down. And Professor Pericles, which, and I was going to look for it to show you guys, and I couldn't find it. It's in storage somewhere, but there were actually 2 Professor Pericles dolls made. And I have one, and Tony Cervoni has one, because for a very brief window of time, they were going to release a Professor Pericles because his character was kind of popular. But so that, you know, that didn't happen. So Tony and I ended up with those. But I love Professor Pericles for 2 reasons. One, I just like the character, and 2, the actor who played Professor Pericles, Udo Kier, was, although a lot of people don't know who Udo is, me being a big movie fan, I knew who Udo was. And, you know, he's a huge star in Germany. And he came in and he was amazing. And again, you know, you get to become friends with these people and form relationships with them. And he and I formed a relationship together. And, you know, he gave me a beautiful gift when one of my daughters was born. But I just loved Udo to death because he was one of these guys, one of these actors he's all in. He used to record episodes when he would do Pericles. One of the first episodes he did, he was always well dressed, and he would wear these very sort of starched shirts. And so he'd flap his wings like the bird, and the shirt would make a ton of noise on the microphone, and we keep having to stop him. And so finally he would just take his shirt off and perform shirtless so he could do all of that stuff. He was he was a character. I mean, Udo, he was a guy who had worked with Andy Warhol. He works with Lars von Trier. I mean, he was, you know, he's a god in my opinion of an actor. And he's coming in, and now he's playing a freaking crazy parrot for us. So you know, it's just, that's the fun. I mean, we got to work with a lot of we had George Siegel, we got to work with on that show. Who else? Several pretty big, decent actors that I was always surprised we were able to get. Not Cloris Leachman. Was it Cloris Leachman? No, it was the woman, she played the mother on the Brady Bunch. God damn it, I can't remember her name, but she was great. Anyways, but a lot of fun actors, a lot of good people came in. So that's all, you know, fun, big fun. There you go.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And I guess touching more on characters and the actors who play them, you introduced an amazing character who is one of our favorites, who is Sheriff Bronson Stone in episode 1.
Yeah.
And were you aware that at that stage that Patrick Warburton would voice that character?
No, not originally. No, but the moment we heard, Patrick Warburton is a very interesting actor. And I've since used him in several different things that I've worked on. Because, and we used to say this all the time, it was like, Patrick does sort of you can always recognize his voice, but Patrick Warburton has the ability to say a line unlike anyone else in the world. No matter how you hear the line in your head when you write it, Patrick Warburton will say it differently. And it's just, so he's, you know, he's just great, you know, and he would say these weird, the strangest things would come out of his mouth sometimes with his inflections. And we were just like, where did that come from? That's so strange. But once he was cast, we then started to write the character for him and, know how he was going to say particular things. So we would purposely write things like that in there. But yeah, Bronson Stone, he showed up in fact, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, anyways, Bronson Stone will be showing up in something else soon. I'm not allowed to say what that is. I probably shouldn't even do that.
No, I mean, we're excited for that because Sheriff Bronson
Yeah.
Stone is just such an amazing character. And another thing that we really love about Mystery Incorporated in general, at least starting from episode 1 as well, is that we recently did like a series of interviews and stuff to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the live action movie. And so to see a nod to the Lunar Ghost in episode 1 within the museum was amazing. Do you know where the idea for that came from?
Oh, that came from, again, that was us looking at every incarnation of the show, which is why there's a reference in one episode to Scrappy in there, because everybody, again, I wasn't aware of the hatred of Scrappy when I started working on the show at first. And then I found out about it as, you'd hear things, because one of the interesting thing about when we were doing Mystery Incorporated, that was when the internet was, Facebook was around, I believe, but it wasn't what it is now. Twitter certainly wasn't what it was now. So what we would do was we would troll the animation websites. And there was one in particular called Toon Zone, which was very popular at the time. And they had hated Mystery Incorporated. They hated, if you ever read the review, the Toon Zone review, was awful. He hated it, this guy. Anyway, so I thrive on that kind of stuff. I love the hate. So I began hanging out on that website all the time, reading the chats and stuff like that, which is where, so we started to see things that people really wanted, that they really wanted to find in the show. And, one of the things that we discovered was the Scrappy hatred and all of the sort of other stuff, which is why we put him in that thing. But I mean, part of what we wanted to do, especially in the early episodes, was connect the dots from what had come before to this sort of new alternate version that we were doing. And it is an alternate version. I mean, they have cell phones, they have modern day equipment, but they're dressed like they dressed in the 60s. It's like, what's happening? But that was all intentional. That was all because we were like, we want to honor the style of what they originally did, but we don't want to set it back in that time. Our great get out of jail free card was the fact that everything resets at the very end. And you find out that everything, Mystery Incorporated is essentially a prequel to the 1968 series. That's what, and we always knew that going ahead of time. So, so we were writing for that on purpose, because that was, because that was a big thing. It was like, is there going to be continuity? How do we get away with the continuity? There's been so many different versions of the show, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, let's just make it a prequel. So we'll make it a prequel. That way we can do anything we want because nothing's happened. And then we can reset it because of this whole sort of thing. The only one thing that did piss some people off, well, there was a lot of things that pissed people off, but one of the ones that actually pissed somebody off on our crew, there was our character, one of our character designers, Derek Wyatt, who was a great dude. Unfortunately, he recently passed away. He was a diehard Scooby-Doo fan. And so he fully believed in the ghosts are not real. You cannot make them real. They always have to be unmasked at the end. And we were like, we paid homage to that throughout the entire thing, but we'd always said, Derek, we're going to get into the second season. And if we're going to pay this thing off, we have to reveal that there is this entity that lives underneath Crystal Cove that's been messing with people for centuries. And he absolutely hated this and it's not that he didn't speak to me, but he got really angry with me for years after that. He would just go, you wrecked it. You wrecked it. And then he went off and blah, blah, blah. He was, I don't know how serious he was. We were fine, but he was so angry that we did that. A lot of people felt we had violated stuff by doing that, but our feeling was we had done so many different things and pushed it so far that we kind of had to go there in order to sort of stay true to what we were trying to do, which was push the show into places that, it hadn't gone before. But anyways, another long-winded way of answering your question. That was, so those ghosts ended up in the show, and other things ended up in the show, like the oh God, what's Alice May character? Her father turned out to be the one villain,
The
A
creeper.
creeper.
right? So wherever we could, we would put stuff like that in the show. And that show in particular, there's Easter eggs everywhere in that show. I mean, if you go back and look at the planispheric disc, there's several episodes where there's like a code written down, and if you look very carefully, that code is the same code that they were using on Lost, the TV show Lost at the time, which was, I think, the code that they had to plug in, and we just thought that it was silly. When the planispheric disc gets solved and it gives them that longitude and latitude, that longitude and latitude is actually Sam Register's office on the Warner Brothers lot that we stuck in there. And there was a bunch of shit. There's a bunch of stuff like that all through the series. The little things, just sort of us and anybody else who wants to sort of find them. You know, the same thing with, you can't see it, I'll move my camera, but there's Harlan Ellison right there. There's his design in the back, which, you know, that was another great thing to be able to get Harlan, who has also now passed away. And, you know, everybody was terrified of Harlan. I knew him through a very good friend of mine, Josh, and I knew that he wasn't a terrifying man, but everybody else was really scared of him because he can be a little bit terrifying sometimes. But he was a kid, you know, he was just a good child when he came in to do the thing. He loved it. And we ended up showing it to him. He got very sick at one point, and we got an early cut of his episode to show it to him in his house while he sat there in his pajamas watching it on the TV like a child. And it's great. It's just, you know, so those are the kind of things that, you know, you get to do on a show. And it doesn't always happen, but this particular show had a lot of that, because for whatever reason, it struck a chord for a lot of people. And so people were just totally gung-ho to work on it. Anyway.
Well, it certainly sounds fun in that, you know, managing to add references in all the episodes there. Like you were saying, with the one episode that almost came across too scary and had to be revisited. So with all those, you know, stories and everything you've taken away, is there an episode that stands out to you the most as the most fun to write and produce for?
Yeah, the episode that I've gotten that question before, and it's always the Cthulhu episode, the Chargar Gothicon episode, which was written by my friend Adam Beecham. But we broke that story together, and I happen to love that episode because I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. That show in particular has, you know, a reference to H.P. Lovecraft. It's got references to Robert E. Howard. It's got there's Che Guevara's in that episode. It's got the whole weird fraternity sequence with Fred. It was just, that episode was just a blast. I love that. That episode is that, and the Mystery Solvers state finals are probably my two favorite episodes. So of the two, which that one I did right, but I just, those are the two, because those were the two that we had the most. Oh, and the Blue Falcon episode that we did, that was written by my buddy Jim Krieg, because we wanted to put more of these Hanna-Barbera characters in the show. And Frank Welker had done the voice of the dog, Dynamite. And so we thought, well, we got Frank, so we'll have Frank do exactly what he did before, but we're going to make the Blue Falcon into basically Batman. He's going to be the Nolan Batman, the Christian Bale Batman. So, and he's insane. But the dog will stay goofy and funny, and we just said, we thought that would be really, really funny, and it did turn out that way. You know, we had Johnny Quest in that episode. You know, we had Johnny Quest is in that episode, and the head villain from Johnny Quest, the Asian, I can't remember his name. Anyways, so yeah, that was those were, anytime we were able to play with the form, I think we had a really good time. Those were always the most fun episodes, where we could play with the tropes and the archetypes and sort of turn them on their head and just have fun with them. And yeah, so all those were a blast. I love the one that we did, like I said earlier, with the Moby Dick. That was one with I think the Kriegstoffe bots was in the crazy German robots that end up killing a bunch of people. You know, again, you look back at it, we're like, how did we get away with that? And Hot Dog Water too was a big favorite character of mine, because not only because it sort of it moved us closer to finalizing Velma's arc, but the fact that we were able to get Linda Carnegie to actually do that voice, and she had played Velma in the movies, and now she's basically playing Velma's girlfriend named Hot Dog Water on the show. It was just like, this gets weirdly meta, in a certain place, but it's just so fun to do that. And you don't get, you don't always get to do stuff like that. The great thing about Scooby-Doo is there's been so many iterations of it, and it's been around for so long that if you really dive into it, there's so much to play with. I mean, with the Vincent Van Gogh character, those were actually, I should say that too. I loved writing the Vincent Van Gogh segments. There was another one too that got cut. I can't remember what it was, but because we had Maurice LaMarche, who was the voice of the Brain and a god of voice actors, doing Vincent Price as this kind of sort of weird English fop, and I just loved it. I just had so much fun with it. All that stuff. Anything. My great dream is to be able to actually do like a true horror show for kids. That I don't think has yet really been done. I know Gravity Falls sort of touched upon it, but but it was never. I just always wanted to do a real kind of horror thing that was still, kids could still watch it and get scared, but not freak out, and it would be fun. We just haven't achieved that yet. Maybe someday. But yeah, I love, those were all the things. I mean, there was a lot of stuff we just loved. It was a lot. That show was a lot of fun to work on. A lot of great people worked on it. We had a lot of support from the studio, except for Cartoon Network. But the Warner Brothers was very supportive. Yeah, just great people, most of which I'm still friends with all these years later. So that's a testament too.
That's amazing. And you listed off so many different episodes that I feel like the whole show is just amazing. And you mentioned about with Velma and everything, and the world of Scooby has changed quite a lot since 2010, with now what people will probably say memorable for either the right or wrong reasons, an adult-centric Velma series coming soon to HBO Max. And with this in consideration, do you think that Mystery Incorporated would have encountered less problems if it was made today?
Good question. Yes and no. I think in terms of showing a gay character or a handicapped character, it would have been easier. But in terms of what we could do, it probably would be harder. I mean, there is it's weird. It's like there's a very conservative, thing going on right now, but also not. So I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it. I don't think we would have been able to do a serialized show again like that. Like, they've never done one like that again. And kids are, because of the way they're protected and embraced, and there's a lot of, microaggressions or whatever you want to call it, sensitivity, triggering, blah, 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 blah. I don't think we would have been able to do some of the shows the way we did them, in terms of trying to make them scary or creepy or dark, so I just don't think we would have been able to do it. I don't think we would have been able to do the stuff about, if you really look at Fred's character on the show, his father isn't who his father is. His parents abandoned him. I mean, Fred was kidnapped as a baby, brought back to Crystal Cove, raised by an essentially evil man, and told his mother was dead. And in reality, his mother was not only alive, but his real dad was also alive. And then they turn out to be horrible people who try to basically kill him. I don't think, knowing, having worked in the kids animation space for quite a long time, I can tell you that that's almost impossible to get that across down. Now, they would never do that, ever. That's probably the main one that I can think of. I mean, certainly, there were people killed on the show. We were never able to show them killed. But you know, if you're paying attention, Angel Dynamite dies, Hot Dog Water dies,
Ed Machine.
and then Ed Machine dies. By the way, Ed Machine is the nickname for Sam Register. That's where who was running Warner Brothers Animation. His nickname, I still call him that, is Ed Machine, because I don't remember exactly why, but we call him Ed Machine. But yeah, Ed Machine dies, and then at the end, the entire town is eaten by a giant bird creature, you know, demon creature. So there's absolutely no way you could do that today. They wouldn't. That kind of dark sort of shit would never happen today. So it's a weird thing, because we could do the gay character today easily. In fact, they would encourage us to do it. We could do the handicapped character. They would encourage us to do that. But the other stuff, no, they won't. Anything that could be triggering or too dark or whatever, that's the stuff that you just can't do anymore. And and I've run into that, on the current show that I'm doing, Big Nate, which I think I actually just started playing in the UK. Obviously because of my love of horror, there's a lot of episodes that have horror elements to them, and it's always a fight every time. And they're nowhere near as crazy some of the stuff we did on Mystery Incorporated. So, it comes and goes, and that maybe it'll swing back the other way. I don't know. I mean, I think it's great that we can now show the diversity that we can show, and all that. I think it's wonderful. I wish the other parts of it went along with it, but as that stuff becomes more liberal, it's weird, other things become more conservative. So it's tricky. It's still a tricky thing. So there's if we were to do the show now, I guarantee you it wouldn't be the same show. I mean, we just wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't. That show happened at a period of time, and also here's a little trick. You'll notice that a lot of great shows that eventually people really like. We made Mystery Incorporated at the time that Warner Brothers Animation was just sort of starting again. So they were looking for anything that worked. They just wanted to do stuff. So they were willing to take risks. When I went to DreamWorks and we did All Hail King Julian, it was the same situation. We had to, you had a brand new studio who was looking to make its mark. And so they were willing to take risks. And so we were able to do on All Hail King Julian, if you've ever seen the show, especially the 5th season of the show, which is one continuous storyline. I don't know that you could do that today. Maybe DreamWorks, I mean, they were pretty good about that stuff over there, but they were willing to take those risks. Now at Nickelodeon, we're doing Big Nate. We're doing a lot of things on Big Nate that Nick has never done before, including a 22-minute show, because they mainly do 11 minutes. But brand new woman running the show over there, Ramsey Naito, who I've known forever, willing to take risks because they want to put Nickelodeon back on the map. So 5 years from now, they might not want to take those risks. But if you can work somewhere at the right time, when the studio is willing to take a risk, you can make a show like that. I think that's how like Avatar, got made. I think Adventure Time certainly, was at a time when Cartoon Network was looking for something. So if you can get at a studio and work there when they're willing to take a risk, you can make a show like that. But that's why you haven't seen another Scooby-Doo show like Mystery Incorporated. I don't know, DreamWorks is always coming out with something new. So, but, and trust, and Nickelodeon, it was a struggle to get them to okay us doing a 22-minute mixed media television show with a very skewed, weird sense of humor. Because it's definitely not like Loud House or some of the other shows that they're doing. More like SpongeBob, quite honestly. But because it was a new regime looking to take a risk and they were willing to go for it, we were able to, I think, do something that we might not be able to do in 5 years. So
that's a very good point. It's so weird how some things can change for the better, some things can kind of regress a bit. But I guess just touching now, and before you prepare to kind of wrap things up, about your almost most recent trip into the world of Scooby. They recently produced the Scooby-Doo Where Are You Now special that premiered, I think it was late last year. And
yeah,
I do
in
believe
that.
that you had a segment in that. Do you remember how that
yeah.
came about and what the process was like to work on that?
You know, that was I was actually surprised that they asked me because you know I haven't been over there for a while now. I'm still in touch with all those guys, but about every 2 or 3 years, I get a phone call from Tony saying, "Hey, they want to do another Mystery Incorporated. What do you think?" And I'm like, "I don't know." He goes, "Look, I don't want to do it if you don't want to do it, and if we can't come up with something really great." I'm like, "Okay," but the problem is he's been busy, you know, directing movies and doing movie stuff, and I've been busy doing other shows. And so, but when that came about because I'm not sure why they bothered to call me, but they did. They called both Tony and they let me come in there. And I think I don't know this, but I do feel sometimes in the back of my head it was because of what happened with Mystery Incorporated when it was first on the air. And the way it was sort of treated by Cartoon Network. And it was a way of saying, hey, look, we acknowledge this now that this really was something good and we really do love it and blah, 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 blah. And we're going to give you this reward by putting you in this. But I mean, so that was fun. I mean, what the best part about that for me was, reconnecting with Tony again. And also getting to come in and do some work on the Scoob animated movie that they did, and something else which you guys haven't seen yet. So I don't even know if it's been announced yet either. So, but it will soon. I made a little reference to it a little earlier. But anyways, and so that so getting to work with Tony again, who I love to death, and we just work really well together. So that sparked us starting to talk about, because I'm not kidding, we do get calls periodically. Would you guys consider doing a 3rd season? And it's always, every time it's happened, it's been at a time when we just couldn't do it. And they're like, we're not going to do it unless you and Tony can come back and do it. And okay, but then it comes from the fans, it comes from the studio, and we would love to do it, quite honestly, if we can come up with a really fun story. Because we had written an outline. I mean, there was a 3rd season schedule. I mean, we had the idea for the 3rd season, which is where they go, they drive across country. So we do some of the stuff that happened in the original series, and then they end up at Miskatonic University with Harlan Ellison again. This was all what we were going to do, and discover this sort of huge new mystery involving the college. And so we had sort of worked out an idea for it, but then like I said, Cartoon Network couldn't have gotten rid of that show fast enough. So we were content with the 52, but we had always planned on there being another season. It just never came to pass. So whether it would be that or something completely new, I don't know. All the actors are still around. I mean, Frank is still working. Matt is still working. Gray is still working. They have a new Velma now, Kate Minucci, I believe. But everybody else is pretty much the same. I don't know whether we could get Dan Kroll was the art director for the show, and Dan was hugely responsible for the visual look of that show. And he's a very, very talented guy. So we'll see. It's not out of the question. And, they keep making these Scoob movies, but it's a younger cast and younger show, but, there's still a little crossover with it. And that's all I'm going to say. You'll see when it comes out when this thing happens. Cause I think I probably already said too much. But anyways, so that special was fun to do, just because it was nice to have that recognition, just to because there's been so many iterations of the show, and even since we did Mystery Incorporated, I think there's been 2 or 3 at this point. Mike Ryan, who worked with us, Mike did his own version of the show. I think it was the last version of the show, which they had all the celebrity guests all the time. So that was Mike's version. It's now become this sort of property where they'll bring in people like myself or whatever, and you do your version of the show. It's like a play. I'm going to do my version of Hamlet or whatever. So But so, and I'm sure they're going to do it again.
Yeah, we've almost been like bombarded with Scooby announcements recently. We had the adult Velma series announced, then we had the preschool series, the Mystery Pups announced, and obviously they're working on Scoob Holiday Haunt. So there's like a lot of things going in the
about that. So that has that been announced? The Holiday Haunt?
Yeah.
So that's the thing I've been referencing. I didn't know whether I was supposed to talk about it.
Well, we're gonna be so excited for that. It's just, oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, there's a fun cameo in that one of a well-loved character from the Mystery Incorporated universe. So you'll see. But I haven't seen the newest cut. I saw a rough cut of it and did some punch up on it for them. But yeah, I mean, whenever I get to work with Tony, it's a dream, and I think both of us would love to do more if we had the time to do it. And certainly Warner Brothers is interested, but they won't do it, and they won't sort of make it all happen unless we can get key people to come back and do it again. So we'll see.
I mean, that gives us a lot of hope, because it'd be one thing for them to go, right, we know that this is going to get views and that this is going to be like well watched, so we're just going to get anyone that we can, knowing that it's going to be successful view wise. Like just the fact that they want to keep the tone of season 1 and 2 of Mystery Incorporated and make it done as good as it can be just fills us with hope. And hopefully we can get that 3rd season eventually, because it definitely is a story that for all one arc definitely had its start and end. There's so many shows that just always have a continuous arc, and certainly with it putting the characters first before the story, almost like there's so many other places where all the characters can go. So fingers crossed for that. And I guess to kind of wrap things up, is there anything that you want to talk about, any future projects that you have going on, and where is the best place for people to keep up to date with that?
Oh, geez, I don't have a website or anything like that. As future let's see. So the future project one's a little easier. Big Nate, which I mentioned, which is based on a book series, which like I said, I think it just started streaming on Paramount Plus in the UK. It'll be on Nickelodeon eventually. We're midway. We're not done with it yet, but so far we have about 48 episodes of that one. It's a lot of fun. Very different than Mystery Incorporated, but it's been a blast because we were able to it's a CG show, but there's also 2D animation in it and cut and paste, like Monty Python style animation in it, sort of all melded together. And there's a good number of spooky themed episodes. At one point, the crew was just going, are we just going to make horror episodes? Is that all we're making here? Because, that's not the books at all. That's more me, just because anytime I can do something like that, I will do it. So there's something else too that I'm working on that it's a live action thing. It doesn't start shooting until next year. It's called, this is a horror thing. So it's called Marie Antoinette Serial Killer. It's going to be shot in Paris. And it is exactly what it sounds like, about a group of American girls who go to Paris. And then one of them is being stalked by supposedly the ghost of Marie Antoinette, and then people start getting their heads cut off as they're trying to figure out what's going on. So that's gonna happen next year. That's we're supposed to start shooting that, I think, next year sometime. So you'll hear about that down the line, about a year or so. But it'll also, I believe it's also going to be on Paramount Plus. So yeah, those are the two big ones. Few other things, but nothing to speak of really. I'm fortunate that I get to, Mystery Incorporated was always was the first time that I ever got to sort of meld my love of horror movies with television and certainly animation. And I dream of being able to do that again. I think that because of streaming and because of Netflix and the other streaming now, HBO Max and those things, you're seeing more and more adult-y type of, horror animation, Arcane and things like that. My hope is that eventually, to get to do something else again in that space, whether it's Mystery Incorporated or not, I don't know, but it would be great if it was, because I still love that world. And I think there's a lot of fun there to be had. And I love the actors. and I loved working with Warner Brothers. So I don't know, but that's my hope, is that to get to do something like that again. And if I could do it with Tony and all the rest of the crew again, it'd be freaking amazing. So we'll see, fingers crossed, you know.
Yeah, fingers definitely crossed for that. And I guess that's what we have for today. And thank you so much for speaking with us. Like, you've spent so much time. I do apologize if anything's run over at all. Like, thank you so much.
Thank you. I know you guys had tried to get a hold of me a couple of times, and I would like respond and then disappear. It was because of crazy crap that was going on. But I'm glad we finally got to do it. Thank you for being persistent.
Hey, no problem at all. It's been an absolute honor to have you here today. And I guess, like, for people watching, thank you so much for watching another interview. You can catch all of Smash's links for his YouTube channel and social media in the description down below, and Rhianna's social media, along with our link tree and everything that needs to be in the description will be included. So yeah, I hope that everyone enjoyed, and I guess please like, comment and subscribe to JayBee and Milly, and we'll see you next time.